Hey there, neighbor. Julie from Wild Homestead Living here with you, and today we're going to harvest worm castings from our worm bin. So I'll give you a little introduction to our bin and then walk you through our process of harvesting castings. So our worm bin is inside of this recycled plastic box, and on our homestead, we like to make sure that most things have two functions, and if they can be beautiful and functional in a couple of different ways, it's even better. Our worm bin is inside of this, and we use this box for a variety of different things. It's a nice place to sit. It works as a kind of a table when we're out here on the patio, and then sometimes we even can pull our grill over and use it as extra prep space. So that is a great purpose right there. And then inside is our worm bin, and by having our worm bin inside, it keeps it out of the way, and it also provides a little bit of extra protection for it being outdoors. So here is the inside of our box, and this is the worm bin itself. It's just a really big kind of industrial tub with lid that we bought at the hardware store, and then we modified it to be our worm bin. I'm going to go ahead and open it up, and you'll see what it looks like on the inside. Now, I should warn you, this is real life, real worm bin action. I haven't prepped this bin in any special way for you to see, and I'm a little embarrassed about how long I've gone without harvesting the worm castings. And our worms are so happy, they've been making a lot of babies inside. So it's a little messy, but this is real life on a real homestead. So you probably are noticing that there's some worms that are higher up here. In general, that means that the bin's getting a little bit full. It needs to be harvested, in my experience. It can also be a time when they mate. They seem to like to mate up near the top. And it can also be that the air holes in the lid have gotten a little clogged. They need oxygen, and sometimes they'll come higher to the top. I've looked in this bin. I look in this bin maybe about twice a week, and I know that we're getting a lot of castings that are really thick in the bottom, and the top is where the worms are living themselves. So today what we're going to do is we're going to harvest the castings to use with gardening, and then reset up the bin for it to be a bigger, more spacious, kind of homey place for our worm family. So here we have my setup for sifting the worm castings, and I'll introduce you to the pieces I have here. So I have this bucket of my worms and their bedding. I have this tray, which is actually the tray we use in our house for our living Christmas trees every year, but you could really use any kind of large container that'll hold your sifting out the soil. I've got my actual sifter, which is a tray from an old worm bin. When we started to have a little bit more money, I saved up and bought a really fancy, expensive one, but I didn't love it nearly as much, and my worms didn't like it at all compared to my big single bin. So we put it aside, but one of the trays is really nice for sifting, and you can see it's got these squares in the bottom that you'll see how this works in just a moment. So I've got that. I've got my wheelbarrow here. If you're working on a smaller scale, like you could do a small container in an apartment under a kitchen sink, you of course wouldn't need a wheelbarrow. You could just have a bucket or even a bowl. But I'm going to be putting my worms and their bedding and their unfinished food in there to go back in the bin. And then over here is where I'm going to be putting my finished castings. Now, again, you don't need something this big. I would recommend using something really lightly colored. I like white because you don't want any worms to be left in your finished worm castings. It's possible that there might be microscopic ones. It's possible there'll be worm eggs, and you can't really avoid that. But as much as possible, you want to get your worms out of your castings and back into your bin. So this is what I use to get started, and I'll show you how I put it into action in just a moment. So here I've got my bucket of worm bin mix, and in a perfect world, I would pour it into the sifter, I would give a few shakes, and we'd have a full container of black gold and a sifter full of worms to go back in the bin. But you know what? Homesteading is rarely perfect. And so we're probably going to end up with a lot of worms mixed in with some bedding and food, and that is perfectly okay. So let's see what happens next. You can see them. I'm going to give it a shake. All right, so this part is the worms and some bedding that's going to go in the wheelbarrow that will eventually go back in the bin. And then here we have our black gold, our worm castings. And I'm just going to look through it, see there's one little worm that made it through. We want him to go back to his family over there. And then this is going to go in the other bin. So now that we have cleared out the bin and I'm very well coated in mud, we can take a look at some of the other features of the bin. So I mentioned there's a spigot, and this is it. And it's completely empty right now, so nothing would happen. But if there was a lot of fluid in here, we could open it and we could drain it. And if you've got a garden or houseplants, that liquid is great fertilizer. If you don't, you could just pour it outside or down the drain. But that is what that spigot looks like. And we just drilled into this Tupperware or Rubbermaid and put this spigot on. All items we got at our local hardware store. Now the bin is mostly empty. You can see what the space looks like. You can see what that cloth, kind of hardware cloth frame looks like. And this separates the main part of our bin from this air pocket and our spigot. So this is where we can see how much fluid is building up. We never want it to get too soggy, and provides a little bit of air circulation. So what we're going to do next is put this back in its box and start layering in some bedding and put the worms back in to their home. So we have our castings here ready to go, and I'm going to be mixing these with our soil mix to start our seedlings later today. And our worms are back in their bin. And something that I didn't mention earlier that's really important about any worm bin that you have is air holes. And we have drilled tiny holes all throughout this top so that they have enough oxygen. If you think this is cool and you're into these kinds of things and would like to start growing your own garden but you don't know where to start, we would love for you to download our free Quick Start Vegetable Gardening Guide. It is 23 pages that can help you get started on all the basics of gardening and has some worksheets to begin planning for your own growing season. And you can find that at wildhomesteadliving.com. So there you have it, an introduction to our worm bin and the worm castings. We'd love to know what you thought of this video, and if you have any questions, wherever you're watching, go ahead and scroll down and leave us a comment, and we'll see you next time.